Daniel stood in front of the large glass doors of the university building, his old backpack hanging from one shoulder. The morning sun was just starting to warm up the campus, and there it was right in front of him. A huge banner stretched across the entrance, announcing the graduation ceremony scheduled for this coming Saturday. 3 more days. Just 3 more days, and he would finally hold that diploma in his hands. He couldn't help but smile. 6 years. It had taken him 6 whole years to get to this point. Most of his classmates had finished in 4, but Daniel's path had been different. He had to work. Not just one job, but 2. There were morning shifts at the warehouse before classes, and evening shifts at the convenience store after. Weekends were a blur of stocking shelves and studying in whatever quiet corner he could find, but none of that mattered anymore. He was about to graduate, the first person in his entire family to earn a college degree. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his mom, he answered, already knowing she'd be excited. "Danny, baby, I can't believe it's really happening." Her voice came through, thick with emotion. He could hear she was trying not to cry. "Your father would have been so proud." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. His dad had passed away when Daniel was 15. Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was there teaching Daniel how to change a tire, and the next day he was gone. That's when everything changed for their family. Money got tight. Really tight. His mom started working double shifts at the diner, and Daniel took on odd jobs after school to help out. "I know, Mom. I wish he could be here." "He is, sweetheart. He's watching. I just know it." She paused, and he could hear her wiping her nose. "Your sister and I, we're going to be right there in the front row, screaming our heads off when they call your name." Daniel laughed. "Please don't embarrass me." "Oh, I'm absolutely going to embarrass you. I've earned that right after all these years of waiting." They talked for a few more minutes before his mom had to go. She had an early shift at the diner. After they hung up, Daniel just stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. This was real. This was actually happening. He walked to his morning class, barely paying attention to anything around him. His mind was already at the ceremony, imagining himself in that black graduation gown walking across the stage, shaking hands with the dean. He'd worked so hard for this moment. All those nights when he'd fallen asleep over his textbooks. All those times he'd been so exhausted he could barely keep his eyes open during lectures. All those moments when he'd wanted to quit but pushed through anyway. Classes that day felt like they lasted forever. His professors were wrapping up final lessons, but Daniel could barely focus. In his economics class, Professor Williams made a point of congratulating all the graduating seniors. Daniel felt a surge of pride when she looked directly at him and smiled. She'd been one of his biggest supporters, always willing to meet with him during office hours, even though he often came in late because of work. After his last class, Daniel headed back to his tiny apartment. It was a basement studio in an old house just a few blocks from campus. The ceiling was low. There was a weird smell he'd never quite identified, and the heating barely worked in winter. But it was his, and it was affordable. Well, barely affordable, but he'd made it work. He tossed his backpack on the small desk that doubled as his dining table and flopped onto his bed. Tomorrow he needed to pick up his cap and gown from the student center. He'd already paid the graduation fee, scraping together the money from his last few paychecks. His mom had offered to help, but he'd refused. She'd done enough for him already. This was something he needed to do on his own. As he lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, his eyes drifted to the corner of the room where his only pair of dress shoes sat. He'd bought them at a thrift store 4 years ago for a job interview. They'd been decent back then, a little scuffed but still presentable. Since then, he'd worn them to every important event, presentations, job interviews. His grandmother's funeral last year, something about them caught his eye. They looked more worn than he remembered. Daniel got up and walked over to examine them more closely. His stomach dropped. The left shoe's sole was separating from the top part. Not just a little bit. A whole section had come loose like a mouth opening wide. He picked it up and the sole flopped around uselessly. No. He grabbed the right shoe. Same thing. Maybe even worse. The sole was hanging on by what looked like a thin strip of old glue. When had this happened? He'd worn them just last month to a job fair. They'd been fine then. Or had they? Maybe he just hadn't noticed. Daniel sat back down on his bed holding both ruined shoes. His mind started racing. The ceremony was in 3 days. He needed shoes. Nice shoes. You couldn't walk across the graduation stage in sneakers or work boots. Everyone would be dressed up. His mom and sister would be there, professors, other students and their families. He couldn't show up looking like he didn't care. He grabbed his phone and opened his banking app. The number that appeared on the screen made his heart sink even further. $4.73. That was everything he had until his next paycheck, which wasn't until next Friday, 5 days after graduation. How had he let it get this low? Oh, right. His mom's medication. She'd called him 2 weeks ago, panicking because her blood pressure medication had gone up in price and insurance wasn't covering the difference. Without even thinking, Daniel had sent her money. It was the right thing to do. The only thing to do. But now he was stuck. He thought about his credit card, the one he kept for absolute emergencies. He pulled out his wallet and checked. Maxed out. He'd used it last semester when his car broke down and he'd had no choice but to get it fixed. He needed that car to get to work. Daniel looked at the time. The thrift stores would still be open for a few more hours. Maybe he could find something cheap. Really cheap. He grabbed his jacket and headed out. The first thrift store was downtown, about a 20-minute walk from his place. When he got there, he went straight to the shoe section. His size was 10.5, and finding that size in thrift stores was always hit or miss. He dug through the racks, pushing aside women's heels and kids' sneakers. Finally, he found a pair of black dress shoes in his size. They were scuffed pretty badly, and one heel was more worn down than the other, but they were intact. He checked the price tag. $15. $15 might as well have been $1,500. He didn't have it. He thanked the worker and left, trying not to let the disappointment show on his face. There were 2 more thrift stores he could try. The second one had nothing in his size at all. The third had a pair, but they wanted $20 for them, and they honestly looked worse than his broken ones. By the time Daniel got back to his apartment, the sun was setting. He'd walked for almost 3 hours, checking every store he could think of. Nothing. He sat on his bed again, those useless shoes still sitting in the corner, mocking him. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his roommate from freshman year, Kevin. "Hey man, heard you're graduating Saturday. So proud of you, bro." Daniel smiled despite everything. Kevin had transferred to another school after their second year, but they'd stayed in touch. "Thanks, man. Yeah, finally making it happen. You ready? Got your suit all pressed and everything?" Daniel looked at his broken shoes. Getting there. Still figuring out a few things. He didn't want to tell Kevin about the shoes. It felt too embarrassing. Kevin came from money. Not rich but comfortable. The kind of family where a pair of shoes wasn't something you had to budget for weeks in advance. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the ceremony. About walking across that stage. About his mom's face when they called his name. About his little sister, Lily, who'd been telling everyone at her middle school that her big brother was graduating from college. Could he really skip it? Just not show up? Pick up his diploma from the registrar's office later? No, that wasn't an option. He'd worked too hard. His family was counting on him. This was supposed to be their moment as much as his. But how could he walk across that stage with no shoes? The question kept him awake until the early morning hours, his mind spinning in circles, looking for an answer that refused to come. Daniel woke up the next morning with his phone alarm blaring. He'd only managed to get a few hours of sleep. His eyes felt heavy, and for a moment he'd forgotten about the shoe situation. Then reality came crashing back. 2 days until graduation. Still no shoes. He got ready for work, pulling on his warehouse uniform. At least there, steel-toed boots were required. Nobody cared if they were old or falling apart as long as they were safe. He grabbed a granola bar from his nearly empty cupboard and headed out. The warehouse shift was brutal. His supervisor had him moving heavy boxes all morning, and his mind kept wandering. Every time he had a spare moment, he was calculating numbers in his head. Could he sell something? His laptop? No, he needed it for his new job that started in 2 weeks. His textbooks? He'd already sold most of them back. The few he kept were ones he actually wanted to reference later. During his lunch break, he sat in his car and pulled out his phone. He opened a browser and started searching. Cheap dress shoes near me. Free shoes. Shoe donations. Nothing helpful came up. Most donation programs wanted you to donate shoes, not receive them. One site offered free shoes, but only to homeless individuals with documentation from a shelter. He wasn't homeless. He had a roof over his head, Even if it was a basement with a weird smell, he'd managed to scrape by for 6 years. He didn't qualify for help, but he also didn't have $15 for a pair of shoes. It was a strange place to be stuck in. His phone rang. It was his mom again. "Hey, sweetie. Just calling on my break. Did you pick up your cap and gown yet?" "Not yet. Going to get it after work." "Oh, good. Make sure it's not too wrinkled. You want to look your best." She paused. "I got my dress cleaned for the ceremony, and I bought Lily a new outfit. She's been trying it on every day. You know how she is." Daniel smiled despite his stress. His sister was 12 and had been counting down the days to his graduation like it was Christmas. "That's great, Mom. Are you okay? You sound tired." "Just working a lot. You know how it is." "Well, just 2 more days of craziness, then you can relax a bit before the new job starts." "I'm so proud of you, Danny. So proud." After they hung up, Daniel sat there in his car for a long moment. He couldn't tell her about the shoes. She'd immediately offer to send money, and he knew she didn't have it either. She'd probably skip paying a bill or buy less groceries to help him out. He couldn't do that to her. After his shift ended, Daniel drove to campus to pick up his graduation materials. The student center was packed with other graduating seniors, all laughing and taking selfies with their caps and gowns. The energy was electric, everyone buzzing with excitement. Daniel stood in line watching everyone around him. They all seemed so carefree. He wondered if any of them were dealing with problems like his. Probably not. Most students here came from families who could help them out. Even the ones who worked part-time weren't usually supporting themselves completely, plus helping their families. When it was his turn, the woman behind the desk checked his name and handed him a large plastic bag with his cap and gown inside. "Congratulations," she said brightly. "Make sure to show up at least 30 minutes early on Saturday. You'll line up in alphabetical order outside the auditorium." "Thanks," Daniel said, taking the bag. He walked back to his car, the plastic bag feeling heavier than it should. Inside were all the pieces of his graduation outfit. Everything except the one thing he needed most. That evening, Daniel had his shift at the convenience store. It was usually quiet on weekday nights, giving him time to think. Too much time, actually. He kept staring at his feet, at his worn-out sneakers, trying to imagine some solution that didn't exist. Around 8 o'clock, his co-worker Ramon came in for the night shift. Ramon was older, maybe in his 50s, and had been working at the store for years. He was a nice guy, always asking Daniel about school. "Hey, college boy," Ramon said as he walked in. "Almost done with school, right?" "Yeah, graduation's on Saturday." "That's amazing, man. Your family must be so proud." "They are." Ramon started restocking the coolers while Daniel handled the register. After a few minutes of silence, Ramon spoke up again. "You know, I almost went to college once. Got accepted and everything. But then my dad got sick and I had to start working full-time to help with bills. Never did go back." Daniel looked at him. "I'm sorry, man," Ramon shrugged. "It is what it is. But seeing young people like you make it through, it makes me happy. You're doing something big." Those words stuck with Daniel for the rest of his shift. He was doing something big. He'd made it when a lot of people in his situation didn't. He'd worked 2 jobs, helped his family, kept his grades up, and was about to graduate. All of that was huge, but he still needed shoes. After his shift ended at midnight, Daniel drove home and collapsed into bed. He set his alarm for early the next morning. One more day to figure this out. Friday morning came too fast. Daniel's last day before graduation. He didn't have to work today. He'd requested the day off weeks ago, planning to use it to prepare for the ceremony and maybe relax a little. Instead, he woke up with a plan. He was going to ask for help. It wasn't something that came naturally to him. Daniel had always been the type to figure things out on his own. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. But what other choice did he have? His first thought was Kevin, his old roommate. Kevin would probably lend him money without a second thought. Daniel pulled out his phone and started typing a message. His fingers hovered over the send button. He couldn't do it. Kevin had already helped him so much during their time as roommates. He'd covered Daniel's share of rent twice when money was really tight. He'd bought groceries and told Daniel not to worry about paying him back. Daniel still felt guilty about all of that. What about his other classmates? There was Michael from his statistics study group. They'd become pretty good friends over the past 2 years. But Michael was also struggling financially. He'd mentioned just last week that he was behind on his car payment. Professor Williams. She'd been so supportive throughout his time at school. But asking a professor for money felt wrong, like crossing a line he shouldn't cross. Daniel spent the entire morning going through his options, talking himself in and out of each one. By noon, he hadn't asked anyone. He decided to try one more thing. There was a community bulletin board at the local library where people posted all kinds of things. Job offers, items for sale, free stuff. Maybe someone had posted free shoes. The library was a 15-minute walk from his apartment. When he got there, he went straight to the bulletin board. His eyes scanned every single post. Someone was giving away a couch. Someone else needed help moving. A babysitter was advertising services, but no shoes. He sat down at one of the library computers and tried searching online again. This time he looked up community assistance programs. He found a few organizations, but most had application processes that took weeks. One place offered emergency assistance, but only for things like rent and utilities. Daniel left the library feeling defeated. He walked slowly back to his apartment, his mind running through the same problem over and over. It felt like he was stuck in a maze with no exit. When he got home, there was a package sitting outside his door. He picked it up, confused. He wasn't expecting anything. The return address showed it was from his Aunt Rita, his mom's sister who lived 2 states away. Inside was a card and a check for $50. Danny, the card read, "I'm so sorry I can't make it to your graduation. Work won't let me take the time off, but I wanted to send you this to celebrate. Buy yourself something nice. Love, Aunt Rita." $50. He had $50. For a moment, relief washed over him. He could buy shoes now. Problem solved. But then reality hit him again. The check was dated today. Even if he went to the bank right now and deposited it, it probably wouldn't clear until Monday, maybe Tuesday. Either way, too late for Saturday's ceremony. Daniel sat on his bed holding the check, and for the first time in a long time he felt like crying. Not just about the shoes, about everything. About how hard he'd worked, how much he'd sacrificed, and how something as simple as a $15 pair of shoes was standing between him and one of the biggest moments of his life. He thought about his dad, about how his dad had always taught him to be resourceful. When life gives you problems, you find solutions, he used to say. There's always a way. But what was the solution here? Daniel lay back on his bed and closed his eyes. Tomorrow was graduation. In less than 24 hours, he'd be expected to show up at that auditorium, ready to walk across the stage and receive his diploma, and he still had no shoes. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily, "Can't sleep. Too excited for tomorrow. I'm gonna scream so loud when you walk across the stage." A little while later, another text from his mom. "We're leaving early tomorrow to get good seats. Love you so much, baby. Can't wait to see you shine." Daniel stared at those messages for a long time. His family was counting on him. They'd sacrificed for him. His mom had worked doubles for years to help him get through school. Lily had bragged about him to all her friends. They deserved to see him walk across that stage. He thought about not going, just picking up his diploma later and making up some excuse. But he couldn't do that to them. He couldn't take away their moment after everything they'd done for him. As the evening turned into night, Daniel made a decision. He didn't know if it was the right one, but it was the only one he could come up with. Tomorrow he would go to his graduation ceremony, and he would do it on his own terms, no matter what anyone thought. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through the small basement window of Daniel's apartment. He woke up before his alarm, his heart already pounding. Today was the day. For a moment, still groggy from sleep, he forgot about everything. Then he opened his eyes and saw his dress pants hanging on the back of his door, his white button-down shirt beside them, and the broken shoes still sitting in the corner where he'd left them. Reality came flooding back. Daniel sat up and checked his phone. 6 in the morning. The ceremony didn't start until 10, but graduates were supposed to arrive by 9:30. He had time, but not much. He got up and walked to the small bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The past few days of stress had left dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted, but today was still happening. He was still graduating. Nothing was going to take that away from him. Daniel made himself a simple breakfast, some toast and instant coffee. He wasn't really hungry, but he knew he needed to eat something. His stomach was in knots, not just from the shoe situation, but from everything. This was the biggest day of his life so far. and he was about to walk into it completely unprepared in the most basic way. As he ate, he thought about the decision he'd made last night. It had come to him around midnight, after hours of staring at the ceiling and running through every possible option. He'd thought about skipping the ceremony. He'd thought about showing up in his work boots and just hoping nobody noticed. He'd even thought about calling in sick. But then he'd remembered something his dad used to tell him. When Daniel was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, he'd been invited to a birthday party for a classmate. It was at one of those fancy places with laser tag and an arcade. All the other kids showed up with expensive presents, video games, and toys that cost more than Daniel's family could afford. His mom had scraped together enough money to buy a small Lego set, and Daniel had been so embarrassed. He'd wanted to skip the party entirely. His dad had sat him down that day and said something Daniel never forgot. "Listen to me, son. You can't control what other people have. You can only control how you show up. And showing up with your head down, ashamed of who you are, that's the real problem. You go to that party, you give your gift, and you hold your head high. Because your worth isn't measured by what's in your wallet. It's measured by what's in your heart." Daniel had gone to that party. The kid had loved the Lego set, and Daniel had learned something important that day about dignity and self-worth. Now, sitting in his small apartment 15 years later, that same lesson came back to him. He couldn't control the fact that he had no shoes. He'd tried everything. He'd done everything he possibly could. But he could control how he showed up. Daniel made his decision. He would go to his graduation ceremony barefoot. The thought terrified him and empowered him at the same time. People would stare. People would whisper. Some might judge him. But he would walk across that stage with his head held high, just like his dad had taught him, because this wasn't really about shoes. It was about everything that had brought him to this moment. Every late night studying, every double shift worked, every time he'd wanted to quit but kept going, every sacrifice his family had made. All of that meant something, shoes or no shoes. Daniel stood up from the small table and walked to where his graduation clothes were hanging. He took his time getting dressed. The pants fit well. He'd bought them at a thrift store last year, and they'd been a lucky find. The white shirt was a little worn but still looked decent. He'd ironed it carefully last night. He'd put on his socks even though he wouldn't be wearing shoes. It felt strange, but somehow less strange than being completely barefoot. Then he thought better of it and took the socks off. If he was going to do this, he was going to fully commit. No half measures. Daniel looked at himself in the small mirror by his door. He looked good. Nervous, but good. He grabbed the plastic bag with his cap and gown and took a deep breath. His phone rang. His mom. "Good morning, graduate," she said, her voice full of joy. "We're about to leave. We want to get there early to find good seats." "Okay, Mom, I'm getting ready now." "Are you excited?" "You must be so excited." "Yeah," Daniel said, surprised to find it was true. Despite everything, he was excited. "I really am. We love you so much, Danny. See you soon." After hanging up, Daniel spent a few more minutes in his apartment. He practiced walking around without shoes, getting used to the feeling. His feet looked pale and strange against the dark carpet. He tried to imagine walking across the stage like this. It felt surreal. But he'd made his choice. At 8:30, Daniel left his apartment. The walk to campus was about 15 minutes. Usually he didn't mind the walk, but today was different. Today he was barefoot. The sidewalk was rough under his feet. Small pebbles and bits of gravel pressed into his skin. He'd never really noticed how uneven sidewalks were. When you wore shoes every day, you didn't think about it. But now, every crack and bump registered. A few people passed him on their morning jogs or walking their dogs. Some glanced at his feet with curiosity, but most didn't seem to notice. Daniel kept walking, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. As he got closer to campus, he started seeing other graduates heading toward the auditorium. They were all dressed up. Girls in dresses and heels, guys in suits and dress shoes. Everyone looked polished and ready. Daniel felt a spike of anxiety. Was he really going to do this? He thought about turning back. He could still change his mind. Go home, skip the ceremony, avoid the embarrassment. But then he thought about his mom and Lily, already on their way, excited and proud. He thought about Professor Williams, who'd written him a glowing letter of recommendation. He thought about all the people who'd believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself. He kept walking. The auditorium came into view, a large brick building at the center of campus. Families were gathered outside taking photos. Kids were running around in their nice clothes. Everyone was smiling and laughing. Daniel walked around to the side entrance where graduates were supposed to check in. His bare feet against the pavement made almost no sound. He felt oddly invisible, even though he knew he shouldn't. Inside the check-in area, there was a table with staff members verifying names and handing out programs. Daniel got in line behind other students. The girl in front of him was chatting excitedly with her friend about post-graduation plans. The guy behind him was on his phone, texting rapidly. Nobody was looking at Daniel's feet, not yet. When it was his turn, the staff member, an older woman with glasses, looked at her clipboard. Name? Daniel Torres. She scanned the list and checked him off. Great, you're all set. Head down that hallway, and you'll find your section based on last name. T's will be toward the end. Thank you, Daniel said. He started to walk away when the woman called after him. Excuse me, young man? Daniel's heart stopped. This was it, she'd noticed. He turned around slowly. Yes? The woman smiled warmly. Congratulations. Today is a big day. Thank you, Daniel said again, relief washing over him. He followed the hallway to a large gathering area where graduates were milling around, adjusting their caps and gowns, taking selfies, hugging each other. Daniel found a quiet corner and pulled his gown out of the plastic bag. He slipped it on over his clothes. The gown was long, falling almost to his ankles. It would cover most of his legs, though not his feet. He put on the cap, adjusting it until it felt right. Looking around, he saw everyone else doing the same thing, making last-minute adjustments, checking themselves in phone cameras. Daniel! He turned to see Michael from his study group walking toward him, a huge grin on his face. Man, we actually made it, Michael said, pulling him into a hug. Can you believe it? Barely, Daniel admitted. This is crazy. 4 years of torture, and now here we are. Michael laughed. Hey, a bunch of us are going out to celebrate after. You should come. Maybe, Daniel said. I'll see how I feel. Michael didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He was too caught up in the excitement of the moment. After a few more minutes of chatting, he wandered off to talk to other classmates. Daniel stood there surrounded by hundreds of other graduates and felt completely alone. Everyone around him seemed so carefree, so normal, and here he was, hiding a secret under his graduation gown, about to do something that terrified him. A staff member with a clipboard started organizing people into lines. Okay, everyone, listen up. We're going to line up in alphabetical order. When I call your section, please form a single file line. Remember, when you hear your name called during the ceremony, walk steadily across the stage, shake hands with the dean, accept your diploma cover, pose for a photo, and exit on the far side. Any questions? Nobody had questions. Everyone knew the drill. They'd been to orientation sessions explaining exactly what to do. Daniel found his place in line. He was between a girl named Angela Tran and a guy named Scott Turner. Angela was talking nervously to the person in front of her about tripping on stage. Scott was checking his phone. The line started moving. They were heading toward the auditorium entrance. Daniel could hear music playing inside, that traditional graduation march that everyone recognized. Through the doors, he could see the crowd, hundreds of family members and friends filling the seats. His heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone around him must be able to hear it. This was really happening. In a few minutes, he'd be walking down that aisle. In a little while after that, they'd call his name and he'd walk across that stage, barefoot, in front of everyone. Daniel took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. He thought about his dad. He thought about everything he'd overcome to get to this moment, and he decided that he wasn't going to be ashamed. Not today. Today, he was going to walk with pride no matter what anyone thought. The line of graduates began moving forward, and Daniel felt his pulse quicken with each step. The graduation march played through the speakers, that familiar tune that he'd heard in movies and TV shows his whole life. Now he was living it. The auditorium doors opened wider and Daniel could see inside. The space was enormous, with rows and rows of seats filled with families. The stage at the front was decorated with the university's colors, blue and gold, with a podium in the center and chairs lined up for faculty members. It looked official and important and overwhelming all at once. Angela in front of him was adjusting her cap nervously. Scott behind him was still on his phone until a staff member told him to put it away. Everyone seemed to be dealing with their own version of nerves. Daniel looked down at his feet. His bare feet. Under the long black gown, they were mostly hidden, but not completely. If someone looked closely, they'd notice. Once he walked across that stage, everyone would see. It wasn't too late to turn back. He could step out of line right now, say he felt sick, and leave. Nobody would blame him. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew he wouldn't do it. He'd come this far. He was seeing it through. The line moved into the auditorium, and suddenly Daniel was walking down the center aisle. The music seemed louder now, echoing off the high ceiling. On both sides, families were watching, taking photos, waving at their graduates. Daniel scanned the crowd, looking for his mom and Lily. There. On the left side, about halfway back. His mom was standing up, waving frantically. Lily was next to her, holding a homemade sign that read, "That's my brother," in glitter letters. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the pride on their faces. His throat tightened. They'd come so far together as a family. His mom had worked so hard, taken on extra shifts, gone without things she needed so Daniel could have what he needed for school. Lily had been patient all those times Daniel couldn't attend her school events because he was working or studying. This moment was for them as much as it was for him. The graduates filed into the reserved seats at the front of the auditorium. Daniel sat down between Angela and Scott. The gown pooled around him, covering his legs and feet completely. For now he was hidden. The ceremony began with speeches. The university president spoke about achievements and future potential. A faculty member talked about challenges and growth. A student representative gave a speech about memories and friendships. Daniel tried to pay attention, but his mind kept wandering to what was coming. Soon they'd start calling names. Soon he'd have to stand up and walk across that stage. The gown would lift as he walked. People would see. What would they think? Would they laugh? Would they feel sorry for him? Would they understand? Daniel realized he was gripping the arms of his chair. He forced himself to relax his hands, to take deep breaths. It would be okay. It had to be okay. The speeches ended, and the dean of students stepped up to the podium. This was it. Time for the diploma presentations. "We will now recognize our graduating class," the dean said into the microphone. "When you hear your name called, please come up to the stage, walk across, and receive your diploma cover from Dean Patricia Rodriguez." Let's give all our graduates a round of applause. The crowd clapped. Daniel's heart felt like it might beat right out of his chest. They started with the A's. One by one, names were called. Students walked up the steps to the stage, crossed to where the dean stood, shook her hand, took their diploma cover, posed for a quick photo, and exited down the opposite stairs. Each one took maybe 30 seconds total. The alphabet crawled forward. B's, C's, D's. With each passing section, Daniel's anxiety grew. His feet felt cold against the floor. He wiggled his toes, trying to warm them up. "Michael Perry," the announcer called. Daniel watched Michael bound up the stairs, full of energy and confidence. He practically jogged across the stage, making the dean laugh as she handed him his diploma. The crowd cheered, more names. More walks across the stage. Daniel noticed how different everyone's walk was. Some people were nervous and stiff. Others were confident and relaxed. A few did little celebratory dances. One girl stumbled slightly in her heels but recovered gracefully. Jenny Stevenson. Robert Thompson. Angela Tran. Angela stood up in front of Daniel. She took a deep breath, smoothed her gown, and walked toward the stage stairs. That meant Daniel was next. Daniel Torres. Time seemed to slow down. Daniel stood up. The gown shifted, and he felt the cool air of the auditorium on his bare feet. He stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the stage. The walk felt impossibly long. Each step was deliberate. The floor was smooth and cool under his feet. He could feel every texture. He kept his eyes forward, focusing on the stairs ahead. As he walked, he heard whispers starting. People were noticing. From somewhere in the crowd, he heard a child's voice say, "Mommy, that boy doesn't have shoes." A few people gasped quietly. Daniel's face felt hot. His instinct was to look down, to shrink, to apologize. But he remembered his dad's words. "Show up with your head high." He kept walking, shoulders back, chin up. When he reached the stage stairs, he climbed them carefully. Now he was elevated, visible to everyone in the auditorium. The stage lights were bright and hot. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, on his bare feet. The walk across the stage was only about 20 feet, but it felt like miles. His footsteps made soft padding sounds against the polished wood floor. The sound echoed in what felt like sudden silence. Dean Rodriguez stood at the center, holding the diploma covers. As Daniel approached, he saw her eyes flicker down to his feet, then back up to his face. Her expression was unreadable. This was the moment he'd been dreading most. Face to face with the dean, barefoot and exposed. But something unexpected happened. Dean Rodriguez didn't look at him with pity or judgment. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw something that looked like understanding, maybe even respect. She extended her hand, and Daniel shook it. Her grip was firm and warm. "Daniel Torres," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear over the general noise. "Congratulations." She handed him the diploma cover, and as she did, she leaned in slightly and said something that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. "You've walked further than most people in this room to get here. Be proud of every step." Her words hit him like a wave. His eyes stung with sudden tears. She understood. Somehow, this dean, who probably came from a completely different world, who probably never had to worry about affording shoes, she understood what this moment meant. "Thank you," Daniel managed to say. The photographer gestured for them to pose. Daniel stood next to the dean, holding his diploma cover, and tried to smile. The camera flashed. Dean Rodriguez squeezed his shoulder gently. "Go celebrate with your family. You've earned this." Daniel walked toward the exit stairs on the far side of the stage. As he descended, the crowd began to clap. Not just a polite smattering of applause, but genuine, enthusiastic clapping. It grew louder. People were standing up. From his section of seats, Daniel heard his sister's voice ring out above everything else. "That's my brother. That's my brother!" He glanced over and saw Lily jumping up and down, waving her sign wildly. His mom was clapping with tears streaming down her face. Around them, other people were clapping too, even people who didn't know Daniel at all. Daniel made it down the stairs and back to his seat. His legs felt shaky. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Scott leaned over and whispered, "Dude, that was amazing. Seriously." Angela turned around from her seat one row up and gave him a thumbs up, her eyes a little watery. The ceremony continued with the remaining names. Daniel sat there, his diploma cover in his lap, barely hearing anything. His mind was replaying those moments on stage over and over. The walk, the whispers, the dean's words, the applause. He'd been so afraid of judgment, of shame, of people looking down on him. And yes, people had noticed. But what they'd seen wasn't poverty or failure. They'd seen courage. They'd seen someone who refused to let circumstances define them. After all the names were called, the graduates stood for the traditional turning of the tassels. Daniel moved his tassel from right to left, officially marking his graduation. Around him, people were cheering and hugging. Caps were thrown in the air, the tradition that always looked so joyful in movies and was just as joyful in real life. The ceremony ended, and families flooded down to meet their graduates. Daniel searched the crowd for his mom and sister. When he spotted them pushing through the mass of people, his composure finally broke. His mom reached him first, pulling him into a fierce hug. She was crying fully now, not even trying to hide it. "I'm so proud of you," she said into his shoulder. So proud." Lily crashed into both of them, wrapping her arms around them. "You were so cool up there, Danny." "Everyone was clapping for you." They stood there in a family huddle, in the middle of the chaos of hundreds of other families celebrating. And Daniel felt something shift inside him. He'd been carrying so much shame about his situation, about not having enough, about struggling while others seemed to have it easy. But standing there with his family, he realized that what he had was more valuable than anything money could buy. He had people who loved him. He had determination. He had dignity. And now he had a college degree. "Come on," his mom said, wiping her eyes. "We need pictures. Lots of pictures." They spent the next hour taking photos all around campus, in front of the auditorium, by the university sign, under the old oak tree where Daniel used to study. His mom took dozens of photos with her phone, making Daniel pose from every angle. Other families smiled at them as they passed. A few people stopped to congratulate Daniel directly. One older man, someone's grandfather, shook his hand and said, "Young man, what you did up there took real courage. Don't ever forget that." Professor Williams found them near the library. She'd been at the ceremony with other faculty members. Daniel, she called out, walking over. I saw your walk across that stage. That took guts. Thank you, Professor, for everything. You've helped me so much these past few years. You did the work yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction. She smiled. I have a feeling you're going to do great things. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel noticed something interesting happening. Several people were taking photos of him, not in a mean way, but like they wanted to remember. A few asked if they could take a picture with him. One woman told him she was a journalist for the local paper and asked if she could interview him. Daniel politely declined the interview. This wasn't about getting attention. It was about finishing what he'd started, but he also realized that something bigger than himself had happened today. His walk across that stage had meant something to people. Maybe it reminded them of their own struggles. Maybe it showed them that dignity wasn't about what you wore or what you owned. Maybe it proved that you could face your fears and come out stronger. As the sun began to set and families started heading home, Daniel stood with his mom and Lily one more time in front of the auditorium. His mom had her arm around him and Lily was still clutching her glitter sign. What do you want to do now? His mom asked. We could go out to eat, my treat. Nowhere fancy, but we should celebrate, Daniel smiled. That sounds perfect. They walked toward the parking lot together, Daniel still in his graduation gown, still barefoot. But now, those bare feet didn't feel like a symbol of what he lacked. They felt like a symbol of how far he'd walked and how much further he was ready to go. Sunday morning, Daniel woke up still feeling the glow from the day before. His diploma was propped up on his desk, right next to the photo his mom had printed out that same evening at a pharmacy. In the photo, he stood on stage shaking Dean Rodriguez's hand, his bare feet clearly visible, his face showing a mixture of nervousness and pride. He picked up his phone to check the time and saw dozens of notifications, text messages, social media mentions, missed calls. What was going on? Daniel opened his messages first. There was one from Kevin, his old roommate. Bro, you're famous. Check your social media. Another from Michael. Dude, your story is everywhere. Confused, Daniel opened his social media apps. His notifications were exploding. He had hundreds of new followers. Tagged photos. Shared posts. Comments from strangers. He clicked on one of the tagged photos and his stomach dropped. It was him, walking across the graduation stage, barefoot. Someone had taken that photo and posted it online. Daniel's first instinct was panic. His most vulnerable moment, the thing he'd been most anxious about, was now out there for the world to see. But as he read the caption, his panic shifted. This graduate walked across the stage barefoot at yesterday's ceremony. When people asked him why, he said he couldn't afford shoes but refused to miss his graduation. He's worked 2 jobs while putting himself through college and is the first in his family to earn a degree. This is what real determination looks like. The post had been shared thousands of times. The comment section was full of people responding. This is so inspiring. I'm crying. This young man deserves everything. This is what courage looks like. Someone find this guy and get him some shoes. There were a few negative comments too. People questioning why he didn't ask for help or suggesting the story was fake, but they were drowned out by the overwhelming positivity. Daniel scrolled through more posts. Different angles of his walk across the stage. Screenshots of the moment Dean Rodriguez shook his hand. Close-ups of his bare feet against the stage floor. Each one had been shared widely, each one sparking conversations about poverty, education, determination, and dignity. A local news website had picked up the story. The headline read, Graduates' Barefoot Walk Inspires Community. They'd interviewed other people who'd been at the ceremony, including Professor Williams, who'd given a statement about Daniel's work ethic and character. Daniel sat on his bed, phone in hand, trying to process it all. Yesterday, he'd been terrified of people seeing him without shoes. Today, millions of people had seen him, and instead of mockery, there was support. Instead of judgment, there was admiration. His phone rang. It was his mom. Danny, have you seen the internet? Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I can't believe this is happening. Everyone is talking about you. Mrs. Chen from the diner showed me her phone. You're on the news websites. People are calling you inspiring. She paused. How do you feel about all this? Daniel thought about it. I don't know. It's weird. I wasn't trying to make a statement or anything. I just wanted to graduate. I know, baby. But sometimes our struggles mean something to other people too. Your story is helping people see that it's okay to not have everything figured out. It's okay to struggle. What matters is that you keep going. After they hung up, Daniel spent the next hour reading through comments and messages. People were sharing their own stories of hardship. A woman wrote about graduating without her family there because they couldn't afford the travel. A man shared how he'd worn borrowed clothes to his graduation. A student currently in college wrote about working 3 jobs to stay enrolled. Daniel realized his mom was right. His story had become bigger than just him. It had opened up a conversation about all the students who were struggling in silence, working impossible hours, sacrificing everything to get an education. By Monday morning, the story had grown even bigger. National news websites were covering it. A morning talk show mentioned it. Someone had even started a hashtag, #WalkProud. Students from other universities started sharing their own stories of financial struggle. People posted photos of themselves in difficult circumstances, refusing to give up on their dreams. The movement was about more than just Daniel. It was about all the people who'd been made to feel less than because of their economic circumstances. Daniel's phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Daniel Torres?" A professional-sounding woman asked. "Yes, this is Daniel. My name is Patricia Rodriguez. I'm the dean from your graduation ceremony." Daniel sat up straight. "Oh, Dean Rodriguez, hi. I wanted to call you personally. First, to congratulate you again, and second, to tell you that your story has moved a lot of people, including me. The university has received dozens of calls from people wanting to help students like you. Alumni are setting up scholarship funds. Local businesses want to sponsor students facing financial hardship." "That's amazing," Daniel said. "We'd like to do something else too. We want to establish a support fund in your name, the Daniel Torres Emergency Fund, for students who face unexpected financial difficulties. Sometimes it's shoes. Sometimes it's textbooks or transportation or housing, small things that can make or break a student's ability to stay in school. Would you be comfortable with that?" Daniel felt tears prickling his eyes again. "I would be honored. Wonderful. We'll be in touch with details. Oh, and Daniel, thank you. Your courage reminded all of us why we do this work. Every student who walks across that stage has their own story, their own struggles. You helped us see that more clearly." After the call ended, Daniel just sat there for a long moment. A scholarship fund in his name. Other students would be helped because of what he'd gone through. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been so ashamed of not having shoes, and now that moment was creating opportunities for countless other students. Over the next few days, more unexpected things happened. The local newspaper did a full feature article on Daniel, interviewing him about his journey through college. A podcast about education and social justice asked him to be a guest. His story was being used in high schools as an example of perseverance. But the most meaningful moment came on Wednesday, when Daniel checked his mail. There was a package with no return address. Inside was a pair of brand new professional shoes, black leather, quality made in his exact size. There was a note with them. "Daniel, I saw your story online. I'm a graduate from your university, class of 1998. I also struggled financially during school. I also had moments where I didn't know how I'd afford basic necessities. I made it through, and now I run my own business. I'm successful. But I never forgot where I came from. These shoes are for your next important walk, whatever that may be. Keep walking forward. You're going to do great things. Best wishes, a fellow graduate." Daniel held the shoes, running his fingers over the smooth leather. They were beautiful, better than any shoes he'd ever owned. But more than that, they represented something bigger. Connection. Understanding. The idea that people who'd walked similar paths were reaching out to help him keep walking forward.